Chairman now recognizes the chair of the full committee, the gentleman from Kentucky, Chairman Guthrie, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Palmer, for bringing us together on this important hearing, and look forward to working with this subcommittee as we work through this Congress. Last Congress, the committee and government watchdogs highlighted alarming developments as the EPA and DOE began rolling out new and expanded programs in distributing funding. One program that encapsulates a lot of our concerns with this new program is EPA's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. In April 2024, the Biden administration announced the awarding of $5 billion to the Coalition for Green Capital. Yes, that's $5 billion. According to IRS tax forms, this organization had revenue of less than $3.5 million in 2023. Providing such large infusion of capital, more than 1,400 times the organization's revenue in 2023, raises concerns, and the ability of the organization to appropriately manage the volume of funding is something we're going to look into. I hope President Trump looks into. I'm sure he will. I hope Elon Musk looks into it. I will guarantee you this committee will investigate this. This is just one example where a large amount of funding went into an organization based on the facts before us, does not have a demonstrated history of managing such large amounts of money. The committee has highlighted some of the funding recipients are led by political allies of the Biden administration, raising questions over whether they were rewarded funds because they were the most deserving applicant, or if funding decisions were driven by other factors. Despite these concerns, in the final months of the Biden administration, there was a push to get money out the door as fast as possible, potentially at the expense of proper due diligence without the right safeguards in place. Today's hearing continues our efforts to ensure that the people's money is sound, and we are not funding our foreign adversaries, that we are safeguarding taxpayer dollars from self-dealing, collusion, and fraud. I will tell you, I do hope the Trump administration, I hope DOGE looks into this, and like I said, I will guarantee you this is just the beginning of us looking into it. And I will yield to the Vice Chairman the remainder of my time.
Thank you for your time, Chairman Guthrie. I'd also like to thank you and Chairman Palmer for holding this hearing today. It's vitally important that this subcommittee conduct proper oversight of the billions of dollars spent on the Democrats' Green New Deal policies over the last 4 years. The infrastructure bill and the IRA provided approximately $100 billion in supplemental funding to the EPA. That's more than 10 times the funding level for the EPA's annual budget. And just a month before President Trump took office, the Office of the Inspector General for the Department of Energy reported that the department's loan program office was administering more than $385 billion in new loan authority without an effective system in place to manage organizational conflicts of interest. In fact, the OIG even recommended the Department of Energy pause all of its loan and loan guarantee reviews. We've all seen the lengths that the Biden administration went in order to hand out cash to far-left activist groups. They even went so far as to give $2 billion to a group called Powered Forward Communities. This organization reported just $100 in revenue for the entirety of 2023, but President Biden's EPA thought they were worthy of $2 billion in taxpayer dollars. I'm grateful the Trump administration has taken action to ensure we're properly reviewing the funding and loan programs and root out waste, fraud, and abuse at the Department of Energy and EPA. I'd also like to thank all of you for being here today, and I look forward to hearing what you're doing to shine a light on the spending spree. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to say I'm genuinely shocked that we're having this hearing today. It was talked about self-dealing. When I go home, the only self-dealing I hear about is from my constituents is the self-dealing by Elon Musk. If they were going to hear about self-dealing, we certainly should hear about what he does and his self-dealing. I mean, Congress is often accused of being out of touch and out of step with the American people, but this hearing is a perfect example of that. At a time when President Trump and Elon Musk are stealing funds approved by Congress for the American people and indiscriminately firing inspector generals and hundreds of thousands of public servants, Republicans are holding a hearing today examining former President Biden's energy and environment investments. Now, the Republicans invited the offices of Inspector General for both the Department of Energy and the Environmental Protection Agency, but the seats before us today would traditionally be filed by the Inspector Generals of the two agencies. After all, these are the Senate-confirmed officials charged with ferreting out waste, fraud, and abuse in these agencies, but they both cannot testify today because they were fired by President Trump at the end of his first week in office. So Trump's purge of these Inspector Generals was illegal. The law requires that Congress be notified before an Inspector General is terminated and that a justification be provided to Congress in writing. The message from Trump's firing of these two Inspector Generals and many others is clear. It's not that he didn't like that particular people responsible for looking for waste, fraud, and abuse, because he filed all the IGs. It's simply that he doesn't think anyone should be permitted to oversee the federal government while he is the President of the United States. And my Republican colleagues apparently agree. Their silence in the face of the termination of so many inspectors general and key federal workforce speaks volumes. Earlier this month, we urged Republicans to hold a hearing on President Trump's sweeping purge of IGs throughout the federal government, but to date they've refused. And yesterday, committee Republicans opposed an amendment to the committee's oversight plan to ensure the independence of inspector generals so they can continue to fulfill their legal responsibility to conduct nonpartisan and objective oversight. And all of this Republican inaction demonstrates that committee Republicans are simply paying lip service to investigating waste, fraud, and abuse. They would rather play politics than actually conduct productive oversight. In fact, Republicans have wasted 2 years and held over 20 hearings looking for any excuse to gut investments in American manufacturing and workers. Today's hearing is Republicans' latest attempt to smear programs that help American workers and working families after they failed to find any evidence of waste, fraud, and abuse. Now, while Republicans are playing politics, Democrats are fighting to protect the historic investments we made through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. These investments are creating new good-paying jobs, lowering costs for American families, and improving our energy security. They'll improve our ability to outcompete China, build our American manufacturing, and reduce our reliance on supply chains controlled by America's adversaries. This hearing is not about oversight or accountability. Instead, it's another effort by Republicans to justify stealing investments from American communities in order to pay for tax cuts for billionaires and big corporations. They're also pushing ahead with their attempts to strip health care away from millions of Americans by cutting at least $880 billion from Medicaid. I firmly believe that this committee has an obligation to conduct robust oversight of the agencies within its jurisdiction. But with all the fires and chaos that Trump and Musk are intentionally starting in these agencies, it's ridiculous that this is what Republicans are choosing to conduct oversight on today. So they remain complicit with their silence, and we'll keep calling it out. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
We now conclude with the member opening statements. The chair would like to remind members that pursuant to the committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. We want to thank all our witnesses for being here today and taking time to testify before the subcommittee. Each witness will have the opportunity to give an opening statement followed by a round of questions from the members. Our witnesses for today are Ms. Nicole Murley, Acting Inspector General at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Mr. J. Alfredo Gomez, Director of Natural Resources and Environment Team in the U.S. Government Accountability Office, Mr. Jonathan Black, Chief Advisor for Strategic Planning and Program Oversight, Office of the Inspector General at the U.S. Department of Energy, and Mr. Frank Rusko, Director at the National Resource and Environment Team in the U.S. Government Accountability Office. You are aware that the committee is holding an investigative hearing, and when doing so, has had the practice of taking testimony under oath. Do you have any objection to testifying under oath? The chair then advises that you are under the rules of the House and the rules of the committee, and you are entitled to be accompanied by counsel. Do you desire to be accompanied by counsel during your testimony today? Okay. In that case, if you would please rise and raise your right hand, I will swear you in. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? You are now under oath and subject to the penalties set forth in Title 18, Section 1001 of the United States Code. Let me get to the right page. With that now, we will now recognize Ms. Murley for 5 minutes to give an opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Guthrie, Chairman Palmer, Ranking Members Pallone and Clark, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Nicole Murley, the Acting Inspector General of the Environmental Protection Agency and the Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I appreciate your longstanding support of the EPA Office of Inspector General as we work to prevent and detect waste, fraud, and abuse in EPA and CSB programs and operations, and drive improvements in efficiency and effectiveness. In line with that mission today, I will discuss our concerns regarding oversight of more than $40 billion the EPA received under the Inflation Reduction Act. While the EPA OIG has not received dedicated funding to oversee these programs, we have observed trends in our ongoing oversight of the EPA's Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act operations, as well as our broader oversight work, for which we forecast risks for IRA funding. The EPA OIG has repeatedly flagged systemic issues regarding the agency's internal controls, particularly data quality and the management and oversight of federal funding recipients, such as grantees. 2 years ago, we warned that these issues could undermine the EPA's IIJA operations, and as I sit before you today, those warnings have come to pass. For example, last fall, our office found that the EPA did not take reasonable measures to verify the state-submitted data it used to allot billions of IIJA dollars to states for lead service line replacement. For 2 states alone, we identified nearly $1 billion in questioned cost and funds put to better use. In another example, we found that the EPA did not adequately monitor the deployment status and the use of over $836 million of rebates for its 2022 Clean School Bus Rebate Program. Furthermore, although the deadline for completing the projects was October 2024, as of February 2025, only 43% of the buses funded by those rebates had been delivered to schools. Reviews of these programs yielded nearly $2 billion in monetary impact. With our unique authority, our independence, and our expertise, we are confident that we could bring the same level of impact and oversight to the agency's IRA programs. And we believe the issues that we've observed in our IIJ oversight are red flags for problems that could be lurking in IRA programs, where, from an oversight perspective, these risks are magnified. The IRA created a paradigm of new funding, new recipients, new initiatives, and a more complex financial transaction stream. In addition, most IRA funds have very tight expiration dates. The agency's push to meet those statutory deadlines creates concerns regarding whether proper internal controls have been employed to vet funding recipients and project proposals and to monitor recipient use and management of those funds. The risks are heightened by the fact that, unlike the IIJA, the IRA does not include funding for EPA OIG oversight. We have already received reports of waste, fraud, and abuse related to IRA programs, as well as allegations of retaliation from whistleblowers coming forward to report these issues. While we are tapping into our core budgetary resources to investigate these complaints, without dedicated resources, we are limited in our ability to conduct a more robust oversight. I deeply appreciate the ongoing efforts of both the House and the Senate to secure dedicated resources for this crucial work. In the meantime, we will strive to provide oversight within our existing budget. Early on, we focused on prevention to help the agency consider safeguards from the outset rather than scrambling to recover mismanaged or misused money after the fact. We briefed more than 1,000 EPA employees and stakeholders on fraud prevention and mitigation strategies. We also raised questions for the agency to consider regarding due diligence reviews, monitoring of grantees and subgrantees, and screening for potential conflicts of interest. With roughly 93% of the EPA's IRA funds obligated, our focus is now detection. In addition to ongoing investigative work, we will leverage data analytics to proactively detect potential fraud. We've initiated an audit to determine whether an EPA contractor that received $147 million in IRA and IIJA funded contracts has complied with federal and contract requirements. And our team is prioritizing additional IRA oversight work focused on grantee and subrecipient capacity and the EPA's vetting process for awards. The examples I've shared today are a cautionary tale of systemic issues reaching across EPA programs that we have noted for years. With a vital mission to protect human health and the environment and more than $1 billion taxpayer dollars at stake, it's essential to learn from the past. We are confident that with the continued support of Congress and the Administrator's commitment to tackling waste, fraud, and abuse, we can help the EPA make meaningful improvements. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions today.
Chair recognizes Mr. Gomez for his opening statement, for his testimony.
Chairman Palmer, Chairman Guthrie, Ranking Member Clark, Ranking Member Pallone, and members of the subcommittee, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss our work on how the EPA is using over $100 billion provided by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. The IIJA included over $60 billion for EPA. We have been focused on the $50 billion that went to water infrastructure and other investments. The IRA included about $41.5 billion in funding for greenhouse gas reduction and other programs. This new funding is a significant increase for EPA's average annual budget of about $8.8 billion per year. My statement today is based on several issued reports and on observations from our ongoing work on how EPA is using and overseeing the IRA funds. Specifically, my statement discusses the status of EPA's IIJA water-related funds and the IRA funds. The IIJA provided EPA with over $43 billion for state revolving funds and an additional $7 billion for other water-related investment. This funding is being allocated to the states using formulas that are set in law, and this is the same process that EPA uses to award baseline funds for the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund programs. Through these programs, states can make loans for wastewater and drinking water infrastructure projects. In our prior work, we have identified the need for better financial indicators that show the growth of these programs and ensure the sustainability of the funds. Last year, we also recommended that Congress consider revising the formula for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. The formula has not been significantly updated since 1987, when it was first put into place. A revised formula would better align with the program's goals, and a panel of experts we convened recommended a formula that is based on states' clean water needs, as well as population and poverty would be better. Now, switching gears, the IRA provided EPA with about $41.5 billion for grants and other investments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and enhance climate resilience. Our analysis of provisional EPA data shows that the agency obligated nearly all of the funds, and about half was expended. The IRA directed EPA to establish several new grant programs and support other efforts. The largest amount was the $27 billion for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. To implement the fund, EPA created a new program office and established 3 sub-programs. The first sub-program is a $14 billion National Clean Investment Fund, awarded these grants to 3 recipients to establish financial institutions that provide financing for low and zero emissions technology projects. Now, the second sub-program is the $6 billion Clean Communities Investor Accelerator, which awarded grants to 5 recipients, provided funding and technical assistance to community lenders in low-income and disadvantaged communities for financing low-emission projects. EPA officials stated that nearly all of the $20 billion for these 2 sub-programs has been obligated and expended by depositing the funds with a commercial bank. This bank is acting as EPA's financial agent and is to provide commercial banking and financial services for the awardees. While financial agents have been used in other parts of the federal government, this differs from EPA's customary funding model. EPA also determined that it would need 74 full-time equivalents to oversee the new program, and at this juncture, it has 38 total staff that oversee the grantees. EPA also has 20 grant specialists that help support this and other programs. Now, similar to other grants, the agency's oversight of these grant recipients includes several reporting requirements, for example, reporting progress on outputs and outcomes. In summary, we have reported that there are risks involved with major new programs, especially when funding is awarded on a compressed schedule. At this point, EPA has stood up programs and issued awards, and now their emphasis turns to monitoring and overseeing those awards. Monitoring existing awards may require different skills and expertise than evaluating award applications. Our ongoing work will assess EPA's process for making spending decisions and its oversight of these monies. Chairman Palmer, Ranking Member Clark, and members of the subcommittee, this completes my statement. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Chair recognizes Mr. Black for his testimony.
Okay, I think I've got a red light. Chairman Palmer, Vice Chairman Balderson, Ranking Member Clark, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jonathan Black. I currently serve as the Chief Advisor to the Inspector General of the Department of Energy's Office of Inspector General. My portfolio of work involves oversight over the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act and the various programs that the Department of Energy has stood up for those acts. Thank you for inviting me to testify today on the oversight work that the Department of Energy's Office of Inspector General is performing regarding the department's Loan Programs Office. In July 2022, the OIG warned in a special report about the risks for potential conflicts of interest and undue influence in the LPO. Also, we raised concerns with fast-moving funds before this very subcommittee in March of 2023. By my accounting, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the 2023 Consolidated Appropriations Act authorized an estimated $385 billion of expanded loan authority in the LPO. I appear before you today to report that the OIG now observes potential problems regarding 1. Conflicts of interest, 2. Accelerated loan closures, and 3. Concerns identified in our loan file reviews. 1. The OIG reported that the LPO has not implemented controls sufficient to properly manage organizational conflicts of interest. This poses a significant risk for fraud, waste, and abuse. The LPO contracts with more than 300 personnel to assist with loan due diligence with expertise in legal, engineering and technical, market analysis, and finance and credit. Also, prospective borrowers provide the LPO with third-party expert reports covering the same subject areas. In the OIG's December 2024 report, we found that the LPO does not ensure that contracting officers identify and evaluate potential conflicts of interest for the third-party experts. Proper management of conflicts of interest requires identifying all parties involved in the process on both sides of the transactions. Federal stewards have an affirmative obligation to do so, but this was not done. Also, the LPO did not ensure that the contracting officers adequately track conflict of interest disclosures and waiver requests and did not share and cross-check that information with appropriate parties across multiple divisions of the LPO. Accordingly, the LPO appears to have functionally abandoned any responsibility for neutralizing or mitigating conflicts of interest. Additionally, LPO's support service contractor was unable to show the OIG records to indicate that it had provided training to its due diligence experts as to what constitutes a conflict of interest, what disclosures, what mitigation steps, and what other measures may be needed. How can these outside experts know what constitutes a conflict of interest if they were not even trained on these requirements? To their credit, the current department leadership acknowledges the risks associated with these issues that we have identified and has paused all new loan closures and has developed and begun to implement corrective action plans to address the weaknesses identified in our December 2024 report. 2. Fast-moving funds. Between November 2024 and the first 3 weeks of January 2025, the department has accelerated the approval of its loans as shown in my written statement. To be clear, during December and January, LPO completed $46 billion of new loans. The increase in pace underscores our concerns about whether it is possible to conduct robust due diligence to protect the tax dollars under such time pressures. 3. The OIG has hired outside experts to help us review 2 recently completed loan agreements. For both of these projects, LPO had hired its own outside experts to identify and articulate serious red flags that they identified before the loans were closed, including multiple major risks that call into question the project's financial and performance viability. Also, LPO employs certain risk mitigation strategy for these major loans. One mitigation measure involves structuring in guaranteed sales agreements in order to assure revenue for the project. Other mitigation measures involve structuring in construction contract terms and commitments that are written in a way to help minimize the risk for cost overruns. For the 2 projects we examined, LPO's own expert advisors duly identified and called out the loan applicant's mitigation measures as being insufficient that may pose risks to the viability of the financial side of the project, and these often covered only 25% or less of the needed revenue protection or cost control. Further, the mitigation measures were largely arranged with related parties, oftentimes relying upon shaky financial positions. In looking through the Credit Review Board meeting minutes, they indicate a willingness to approve loans despite these risks. Also, we observed that the LPO did not update some of their data and analysis for evolving market conditions and changes in the political landscape that may inform the long-term prospects for repayment of these loans. In closing, I would like to recognize the bipartisan efforts of this subcommittee to provide oversight for the department's loan program office. Thank you for your continued support for the independent oversight that the OIG does to advance transparency and to prevent and detect fraud, waste, and abuse. I appreciate the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Rusko for his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Palmer, Ranking Member Clark, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about our work on DOE's IRA and IIJA spending. My testimony today focuses on two DOE offices that each received a lot of money from the IIJA and IRA. DOE's Office of Clean Energy Demonstration, or OCED, was created in 2021 and manages demonstration projects in 8 different areas, including hydrogen hubs, carbon capture and sequestration, and advanced nuclear projects. The money funding these projects came from the IIJA, about $22 billion, and the IRA, about $5 billion. Through September 2024, OCED had awarded almost $19 billion. Most of this went to 4 areas, including $10 billion for industrial decarbonization and carbon capture projects, $8 billion for regional hydrogen hubs, and $1 billion for advanced nuclear projects. Since October 2024, OCED approved another $6.6 billion, mostly to hydrogen hubs and industrial decarbonization processes. Only a small amount of the committed money has actually gone out the door, and the remainder will depend on projects meeting milestones, including passing independent cost reviews. The private sector companies receiving these awards have a lot at stake in ensuring their success because OCED money is matched by private sector partners. When we audited OCED in 2023 and 2024, we found that the office had adhered to a number of recommendations we had made regarding past DOE carbon capture and advanced nuclear demonstration projects. OCED also brought in a large number of new employees and contractors from the private sector to build the expertise to evaluate applications for awards. However, we also found that OCED could improve its procedures by better defining its goals and developing metrics to measure progress, and by developing a strategic workforce plan to ensure it maintains the right number of employees with the right skills going forward. DOE's Loan Programs Office, or LPO, oversees loans and loan guarantees across 5 different programs, including auto manufacturing, nuclear power, biofuels, and renewable power. LPO first issued a loan in 2009 using money from the Recovery Act. More recently, LPO received about $370 billion in loan-making authority, most of it from the IRA. $290 billion of that authority expires in 2026, and another $60 billion expires in 2028. In total, to this date, LPO has made loans or loan guarantees equal to about $67.5 billion. Of that amount, $24.4 billion was awarded in the last quarter of 2024, and about $25 billion was awarded in January 2025 alone. We will be conducting future work looking at the LPO's overall processes, but I can say today that my biggest concern for the LPO is a rapid and increasing pace of loans that were issued in the last 4 months. As we have testified before to this committee, we get concerned when agencies have a lot of money to spend and a short amount of time to spend it. We will continue to monitor both OCED and LPO going forward. It is important to note that for both OCED and LPO awards, the money typically goes out in tranches as projects successfully pass milestones and meet financial viability conditions set in the terms of awards. To make sure future money is spent wisely, it is essential that both programs have staff with the right skills to evaluate the milestones and financial viability of projects that have already received awards. Often this will require contracting out for expertise that the agencies do not possess in the right quantities to handle all the work. In recent weeks, both offices have lost staff and the services of contractors as a result of resignations, dismissals, and spending freezes. As we perform our ongoing oversight, we will be evaluating how the offices respond to these and other changes to ensure that further money to awardees is spent wisely. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions the subcommittee has.
Thank you for your testimony, and we will now move into the question and answer portion of the hearing. With that, the chair recognizes the vice chairman of the committee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Balderson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today. It's clear that the Biden administration was trying to get as much money out the door as possible before President Trump's inauguration. For example, a senior Biden administrator official was quoted saying in early December 2024 that the administration was on track to exceed its goal of obligating over 80% of available IRA grant funding by the end of Biden's term. Moreover, former Secretary Jennifer Granholm was quoted in October 2024 as saying that she is racing to commit funding and get contracts signed. Many of us are also familiar with the video in which a special advisor for implementation within the Biden administration's EPA was caught on camera saying that it's truly like we're on the Titanic, we're throwing gold bars off the edge. The special advisor also said that they were trying to get this money out as fast as possible before they come in and stop it all. It is clear from the video that the individual was referring to the Trump administration. Given these comments, I want to focus my questions on how the desire to push money out quickly extended to DOE's Loan Programs Office. My questions will be directed to you, Mr. Black. Your testimony notes that between November 2024 and January 2025, the department appears to have accelerated its processing and approving of loan guarantees that were under review. Specifically, as you stated, that between December 2024 and January 2025, the DOE Loan Programs Office completed loans worth more than $46 billion. Your testimony also has a chart that shows from March 2022 to August 2024, there were 5 loans closed as compared to 20 loans closed in the last 5 months of the Biden administration. Your testimony notes that the increase in pace underscores concerns about whether it's possible to conduct robust due diligence to protect taxpayer dollars under such time pressures. Can you elaborate on that statement?
Certainly. Yes, the numbers of loans closed, as represented in the written statement, do indeed indicate that there was a accelerated attempt to close those deals that were under review by the LPO. The limited work that the Office of Inspector General did on the 2 file reviews that we went to so far in depth seemed to indicate that there was a tolerance that the LPO leadership had for accepting risk that may not be fully protective of the taxpayer interests.
Thank you. You also mentioned in your written testimony that your office was looking into some of the risk mitigation measures, or lack thereof, we've touched on that, regarding 2 recently completed loans. I understand you cannot discuss the specifics cases under review, but can you elaborate more on some of these risk mitigation strategies and explain how pressure to expedite a loan or loan guarantee could impact having the appropriate risk mitigation measures in place?
Certainly. One of the common things that the large capital financing energy construction project industry has is to try to write in guaranteed sales agreements. They call them offtake contracts to assure that the project that is borrowing $1 billion or more has guaranteed accounts receivable, guaranteed sales, so as to finance and service the loan going forward. The more you can lock down as far as revenue is concerned, the safer the project financial viability is, and the safer the taxpayer is protected from, risk of default. Similarly, they have these risk mitigation measures structured on the cost side, where they have construction contracts, terms and conditions that seem to lock down and guarantee that cost overruns don't occur during construction. And so this indeed was engaged in, these kind of strategies were engaged in by the LPO, and but for the 2 files that we reviewed, we found that there was very minimal guaranteed sales agreements and very minimal cost controls on the construction side to control costs.
Thank you. Follow up to that, and you've answered some of this, but are there any other stages of loan approval or negotiation processes that can be impacted by the pressure to close loans quickly? And you have about 15 seconds.
The due diligence process that the LPO goes through is rather extensive, and they have some world-class experts commenting to and helping the LPO with this decision-making process. And our overriding concern is that the LPO may not have given appropriate consideration to those results.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes the distinguished ranking member from New York, Ms. Clark, for 5 minutes for her questions.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and I thank our panel of experts for appearing here today. In calling this hearing to criticize EPA and DOE programs, Republicans are ignoring the extreme actions that this administration has already taken to sabotage these programs and prevent President Trump from being held accountable. We should be hearing from the Senate-confirmed Inspector General for DOE and EPA, but we are not, because last month, Donald Trump fired them. In the middle of the night and after less than a week in office, Trump fired at least 19 Inspector Generals without providing any notice or justification to Congress as the law requires. Trump had even handpicked the DOE and EPA Inspector General during his first administration, making their removal even more absurd. My first question is for Mr. Black. I understand that the Deputy Inspector General, who would normally step in as the acting IG, also left DOE OIG last week. And I've been told that your last day with DOE OIG is this Friday. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I've also learned that 39 DOE OIG staff chose to take this deferred resignation program that was pressed on them. This represents 13% of DOE OIG staff, including 5 senior executive staff. Is that also correct?
Yes, your numbers are accurate.
Thank you. Ms. Murley, obviously the former Inspector General, Sean O'Donnell, was unceremoniously fired by Donald Trump. But has your office also experienced departures of personnel and hiring challenges recently?
We have not experienced departure of personnel. However, we had, I have the number, I think it's 32 individuals in various stages of the hiring that were frozen as part of the hiring action, and a total of 32 individuals, or 23 individuals who responded to the deferred resignation program, and we're still evaluating the impact of that on our ongoing work.
Thank you. It is simply outrageous that the committee Republicans have called today's hearing to attack programs they have thoroughly investigated for years without finding any evidence of wrongdoing, yet remain silent about the immense risks being created by the Trump administration's all-out assault on agency OIGs. Inspector Generals are taxpayers' watchdogs, rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse at the agencies they oversee. It is stunning and disgraceful to see Republicans turn a blind eye to the fact simply because Donald Trump is the president. Mr. Gomez, Mr. Rusco, GAO has previously raised concerns about DOE's and EPA's workforce and whether there are enough people to effectively manage programs at those agencies. Do you think that the workforce reductions that are being reported threaten DOE and EPA's ability to effectively manage programs and ensure accountability? Mr. Rusco?
I do think that the agencies will have a challenge to restructure how they do their work in order to monitor the money that's out the door that they need to follow to make sure that additional tranches of funding are issued in a wise manner. So I do think they're going to have a challenge there.
Mr. Gomez?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of work looking at grants management workforce, and as you know, EPA's about half of its budget goes to the states and tribes in the form of grants. And so it's really important to have the workforce, right, that you need with the right skill set to oversee those grants. And especially now with a large infusion of funds at EPA and new programs and expanded programs, having the workforce that you need to do the oversight is most important.
Thank you. Uh, the Trump administration is picking the pockets of millions of Americans in Democratic and Republican districts. Every day that goes by where the administration ignores court orders by withholding award funds in another day is another day that America's progress is delayed. Handing out tax breaks to billionaires at the expense of American workers hurts our constituents and hurts our country. Republicans need to stop sitting on the sidelines, stand up for their constituents, and hold Elon Musk and Donald Trump accountable. Regardless of what my colleagues on the other side decide to do, I will always stand up for my constituents and fight to hold this administration accountable. With that, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Guthrie, for
Thank-
5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you. I can assure the committee that we are going to investigate and look at waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think we're beginning, this is just a beginning hearing. I'll tell you that. And think about this. So you have the Greenhouse Reduction Fund, $27 billion. There is the Coalition for Green Capital that we said the year before this had $3.5 million is what we could find of their income. They get a $5 billion grant. That's facts. That's not making anything up. And if you don't think we should look into a $3.5 million company getting a $5 billion worth of income, and then so they announced on January the 22nd, it was providing $200 million of its $5 billion to a company called Greenie Re. Based on the state of Vermont's records, an organization with this name was recently incorporated in October 2024, only a few months after EPA selected the Coalition for Green Capital to receive its award. According to Greenie Re's website, one of the organizations initially behind its formation was the Coalition for Green Capital. So Coalition for Green Capital is a $3.5 million company, gets $5 billion. Greenie Re is incorporated in October of 2024. And they have on the website that one of their initially behind their is the Coalition for Green Capital is behind their organization. I'm concerned about what this brings, what this is. I'm just described the process I just described raises questions about how EPA has been monitoring the program. So, Ms. Murley, your written testimony notes that effective monitoring of grant or loan recipients and subrecipients is critical internal control for grant-making agencies like EPA. Based on examples like the one I just provided, your knowledge of recipient and subrecipient relationships and EPA's grant management practice, what are EPA's OIG's concerns with recipients' ability to monitor subrecipients, particularly when the subrecipients have a relationship with the recipient?
So our concern is, and it's been a continuing concern of grants management and looking at the capacity of the recipients and the subrecipients to handle the money that they've been given. And I think what you're talking about is due diligence and conflicts of interest in grants or other programs, which is certainly something that we are interested in looking into. I'm not sure I understand the question about the subrecipients.
Well, the subrecipients, if it is a creature of the recipient, and the subrecipient, you have concerns with that?
Under that facts, that would be something we would look at for due diligence checks from the agency and how the recipients of the money was vetted, and also the controls that were put into place before the vetting went out. What rules were put into place, what parameters, what guidelines, that would definitely be something.
Would you be concerned that in October of last fall, a company was incorporated and all of a sudden they're getting a $200 million grant? Would that be something that would flag?
If that was the evidence that was presented, that would be a concern. There would be a risk.
So let me go to Mr. Gomez. Relatedly, I'm also concerned about the oversight conducted of recipients and subrecipients to ensure they're meeting performance goals. Your written statement noted that EPA officials said they had not yet developed program-level performance goals and measures for the 3 sub-programs of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and they need 1 to 2 years before doing so. With no program level, so in your experience, evaluating grant and other financial assistance programs, is it typical for a program to not have performance goals or measures for years?
No, it's not typical. I mean, generally with new programs, they're trying to figure out, first of all, what they're going to accomplish, what the goals are for it. And so they take sometimes a little while to set up those performance goals and measures, but those are important. I mean, our job obviously is to follow the money, right? So we want to make sure that the money's accountable, whether it's going to the grantees or sub-grantees, or at the end, maybe the beneficiary. So understanding what that process is, looking at what controls are in place, what reporting requirements, to make sure that you're safeguarding against.
Would you be extra concerned if an entity had a $3.5 million revenue, got a $5 billion grant, a company was created that had I forget that, I think it was just created in October 24, and they got a $200 million grant that was a subrecipient of that company?
I mean, I think it would raise a flag for us, because we'd want to ensure that that company now that has a large infusion of funds, is it structured, right? Does it have the people to carry out the work? And is it going to be able to carry out the terms and conditions, for example, of that grant or that award? So those would be things that we would be looking at in our reviews, right?
Appreciate it. We are going to be, and my time's expired, but we will be looking at it, so thank you for that. Yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you, Chairman. In less than 2 months, we've watched Elon Musk and President Trump brazenly try to circumvent any check on executive power and eliminate independent oversight, and congressional Republicans have been silent. At the Department of Energy, as many as 2,000 career staff were suddenly fired without warning, including staff responsible for our nuclear stockpile and others from offices that were responsible for managing loan and grant programs. And the same scene played out at EPA, with hundreds of staff suddenly fired or put on leave, including career staff with decades of experience monitoring EPA programs. And then over the weekend, federal workers received the latest in a series of abusive mass emails from Elon Musk, this one directing recipients to respond with a list of what they did last week by Monday at midnight, otherwise they'd be terminated. And that, of course, sparked further confusion. I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to enter an article from the Washington Post about this latest Musk email. If I could, I'll give you a copy of it.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. So I want to ask each of the witnesses a simple question. Could the broad and sudden termination of so many career officials risk impairing EPA or DOE's ability to effectively oversee awards and loans? Ms. Murley?
The grants capacity of the agency to oversee its grants and management, we actually have a report that will be coming out talking about the agency's capacity to manage its grants, and so yes, that would be a concern.
Thank you. And Mr. Black, let me, I know it's your last week, and so I want to thank you for your service. But if I could ask you that same question, you want me to repeat it, or you?
No, I understand the question. I think that reductions of that magnitude would certainly have some impact on the program's ability to effectively conduct its work, and it'll perhaps slow work down in order to do a quality job.
Thank you. And Mr. Gomez?
Yeah, so our past work on that subject shows that you need the right staffs with the right skill set in the right places.
Thank you. Mr. Ruska?
Yes, I can give you a specific example in the Office of Clean Energy Development. Among the things that happened in the last few weeks was a funding freeze coincided with a renewal of a contract with a key private sector company that was going to do independent cost analysis for ongoing projects. If those don't happen in a timely fashion, then either money goes out the door that didn't have that review, or projects that private sector spent a lot of money on could be delayed or canceled. So it is troubling.
Thank you. And Mr. Black, let me go back to you. DOE OIG has specifically highlighted the workforce concerns that DOE's Office of the Inspector General previously identified at the Loan Program Office that could hinder the office's ability to move from a posture of evaluating applications and closing loans to one focused on post-closure monitoring of finalized loans. Now, earlier this month, 45 staff at the Loans Program Office were suddenly terminated. Are you concerned that these terminations could negatively impact oversight and management of portfolio loans and loan guarantees? And what would even greater losses in workforce mean for oversight and accountability, if you will?
Certainly, reductions of staff at the LPO would absolutely have some impact on their ability to process loan applications, and would certainly have some impact on the ability to monitor those loans over time.
And then lastly, the administration's arbitrary and senseless cuts to our federal workforce are making it harder for DOE and EPA to oversee the grants and loans Republicans pretend to be so concerned about. If Republicans were serious about protecting taxpayers and fighting waste, fraud, and abuse in grant programs, they would be holding the administration accountable by doing real oversight work instead of smearing award recipients who are just trying to build a better future for this country. That's my opinion. I don't have another question. But I just, again, as I said, I can't believe the focus of this hearing today. It's not what I'm hearing at home. When I go home, everyone's worried about freezing of funds, termination and firing of people, tariffs. I mean, people are generally concerned that these Trump policies are going to lead to a recession. That's what they're telling me. The market is going up and down. Retail sales are down at an all-time low. I'm just afraid, and this is what I'm hearing, we're headed towards a recession with these Trump Republican policies. I hate to say that because that's not what I want to see. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith, for 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just have to say that in my district, people have been concerned for decades about money being spent in Washington, D.C., that they don't understand why it's being spent, and they don't understand how it costs so much money to do the things that they probably could do themselves a lot cheaper. So I'm hearing different things than my good friend, Mr. Pallone, is hearing. Now, let me start off on this hearing and say that I'm proud of the work that this subcommittee did last Congress to oversee the implementation of the Clean School Bus Rebate Program. Additionally, I will say electric buses work for some schools, but this program was set up in a haphazard way, and in some cases, school districts have not received all the buses they paid for. Ms. Murley, as your office has since completed additional work on the program, can you provide any updates on EPA's efforts to appropriately monitor recipients' use of rebate funds?
Yes, as a result of our 2022, or our report on the 2022 rebate program, when they did do a second round of rebates, they put in more internal controls on the recipient's use of those funds compared to what they had done in 2022, which is not put any controls on the recipient's use of those funds.
And what happens when you don't put any controls on the recipient's use of funds? A lot of it gets frittered. I won't use waste, fraud, and abuse because my colleagues on the other side hate that term, but it gets frittered away, does it not?
The risk is there.
Yeah, substantial, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, it's a risk situation when you have no restrictions on the funds and they sit in accounts for a while or they're commingled.
You can say there's substantial risk. Come on, you can say it.
There's substantial risk.
All right. And is your office specifically aware of the Lion Electric case where the electric bus manufacturer is now bankrupt?
We have seen the news reports and share the concerns reported. We don't comment. We have a longstanding policy of not commenting or confirming on investigations. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I mean, that tells me there's an investigation. I'm pleased. From an auditing methodology standpoint, can you help me understand how the use of rebates, and maybe it's different when you have substantial controls, but how the use of rebates makes organizations, agencies, et cetera, more vulnerable to having problems similar to the Lion Electric situation?
So the use of rebates is different, obviously, from putting out a grant. And grants are long-standing vehicles for getting money to recipients. So they have more controls in place. There's rules, they're written up front, they're standard. The rebate program was a new way of getting out funding for the Clean School Bus program. And so it increased the risks because it doesn't have the same level of internal controls that a grant would have.
All right, I appreciate that. In your testimony talking about the Clean School Bus Rebate Program, you state, quote, although the deadline for completing projects was October 2024, as of February 2025, only 43% of the buses funded by the 2022 Clean School Bus Rebate Program have been delivered to the schools, end quote. Is your office aware of any other issues that have contributed to so many of the buses not yet being delivered and recipients missing the deadline?
I don't have that information today, but I'd be happy to submit it for the record. I do know that we have continuing audit work related to the Clean School Bus Program and oversight of the grant programs established there.
Now, I know you can't talk about ongoing investigations, but do you have any idea or any information you can share? And I'll open it up if somebody else has information to share on what happens to the school systems that were using line electric. Fortunately, none of those are in my district, but that were using the line electric because now they can't get serviced, can't get parts, and they basically have useless hulls, as I understand it from media reports. Do you have any additional information?
I do not.
All right. Does anybody else on the panel have any information on that particular subject matter? All right. Well, this is why we have these hearings, so we can identify problems, and we'll probably come back and ask additional questions at a later date. At this moment, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thanks, gentlemen. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Fletcher, for 5 minutes for her questions.
Well, thank you so much, Chairman Palmer. I'm glad to work with you and everyone here on this important subcommittee in this Congress. And I think the testimony this morning has been useful and important, and certainly we are addressing things of great concern to all of us. I think all of us are concerned about ensuring that our government functions efficiently, effectively, and ethically. And that's why we appreciate the work that the Office of Inspectors General do in each of our agencies and departments, and the work that you do to ensure that efficiency from the Government Accountability Office as well. Certainly, I want to associate myself with the comments of our chairwoman and of our ranking member on my side of the aisle, and with our ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Pallone, about the concerns that I'm hearing at home in my district from my constituents about recent actions that have not demonstrated either efficiency or effectiveness or ethical and responsible governance, and that there is a great deal of concern. And so I want to ask a few questions about that and kind of go straight to them. I want to start with you, Ms. Murley. Recently, at the direction, at the behest of President Trump and Elon Musk, the EPA in Region 6, which is my region, decided to place every NEPA permit reviewer on administrative leave. So for Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, New Mexico, and Oklahoma, there are no EPA employees to do NEPA reviews at this time. As I think everyone knows, this is a hub for energy and infrastructure projects in this office with those states and 66 tribal nations. Do you expect that this will impact EPA's ability to carry out its statutory responsibilities under NEPA if we have no people who can review NEPA permit applications, perform NEPA reviews?
I think that's a question better directed to the agency, but I will say that we have concerns about the workforce planning and the amount of people available to do the work of the agency.
Thank you for that. I think that ties into something, Mr. Gomez, that you talked about in your testimony, in your written testimony. You talk about several GAO recommendations to address workforce challenges at EPA, specifically in EPA grants management, and they included persistent staffing level declines and burnout that was causing high turnover. And so I think that sounds consistent with what I'm hearing from Ms. Murley about staffing concerns at EPA. Would you agree with me that arbitrary firings will negatively impact EPA's ability to implement those GAO recommendations?
I mean, I think we would look at, where those firings are taking place and what the roles of those people are and whether they are sort of in the front line of implementing recommendations. So, if it's across the board, then it's having impacts in various programs. So, and so yes, if it's in those areas where people need to take action, then we may need to be, or we may be waiting to, for folks to take that action.
Well, and I guess maybe more broadly, my question would be, I mean, certainly you would agree with me if you were concerned about employee retention, employee morale, that arbitrary firings, threats to employees, abusive treatment of employees are problematic for employee retention and carrying out the efficient administration of the agency's responsibilities.
I would agree, yes.
Okay. And I want to talk about one other thing with the time I have left. Mr. Black, you spent a lot of time in your testimony talking about conflicts of interest, and I think it's really important that you raise that. And I'm going to ask you for the record to explain generally kind of why conflicts of interest are problematic and of concern to you. But for our purposes here, would you agree with me that federal conflicts of interest statutes and financial disclosure requirements are important?
Yes, absolutely.
And federal officers are prohibited from participating in government matters that affect their financial interests, correct?
That is my understanding, yes.
And senior federal officers are also required to publicly disclose their assets, liabilities, income, other financial information so that the public can know whether they're complying with those conflict of interest rules.
That's correct.
Okay, and so I'm out of time here, and I'll just say that certainly my constituents are deeply concerned about the kinds of things that we are seeing and the conflicts of interest that are emerging and quite clear in the Department of Government Efficiency.
Gentlewoman's time
So with
has
that, I will
expired.
yield back. Thank you.
Chair recognizes gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, for 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Texas is leading the way to unleash American energy by accelerating the deployment of new nuclear energy. X-Energy, one of the Department of Energy's Advanced Reactor Demonstration Programs, ARDP awardees, which was created by the Trump administration, has partnered with Dow Chemical to supply heat and electricity for their facility on the Texas Gulf Coast just south of my district. Wasteful spending at the Department of Energy could go towards innovative American nuclear projects like this one that actually give taxpayers a return on their investment. Mr. Black, I'm coming to you. How will the administration's Department of Energy support programs like the ADRP to ensure that they're successful in advancing the next wave of nuclear energy? I know you're leaving, but...
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't come prepared to talk about the Advanced Nuclear Energy Program. Rather, my statement was prepared for the Loan Programs Office.
Okay.
So I don't have any particular details to share with you about anything about the advanced nuclear.
Ms. Murley, do you have any details on that?
I do not.
Gomez, Mr. Gomez?
I would defer to our Director on Energy, Frank.
Frank, you're up.
Thank you. Well, Congress does appropriate money to the Office of Nuclear Energy, and also there is some money in the Office of Clean Energy Development for nuclear projects. So I guess yes, it would be incumbent on Congress to appropriate money specifically to support new nuclear technologies, and I think that's would be well warranted.
Taxpayers are helping fund these innovative projects, but it is unfortunate that with the Biden, DOE, and EPA, one hand has not, apparently, the left hand has not been talking to the right hand. I guess that's an appropriate political term, is it not? And so these CCS projects depend on access to carbon storage infrastructure and the ability to acquire an EPA Class 6 permit in a timely fashion. Keyword there, timely. Meanwhile, as the EPA was all hands on deck shoveling billions of wasteful green spending out the door, they neglected to do their actual job here. The Trump administration has now inherited a backlog, are you ready for this, of over 160 permits. Did y'all know that? Did you know that, Ms. Merlin?
I knew there was we have ongoing work in the Class 6 wells program looking at the EPA's ability to meet its timelines and goals in getting permits for those wells.
Mr. Gomez, were you aware of that?
I was not aware of that number, no.
Mr. Black?
No, sir, that is not information that I've done oversight work on.
Frank? Mr. Is it Rusco or Rusco? Yeah, okay. He kind of outed you. Is that a concern, Mr. Gomez, that all of the backlog of these permits?
Yes, I think as we were talking earlier, right, is that the backlogs can have an impact, right? And, Frank was providing earlier an example of how not getting the reviews done can have impacts down the line, so.
Mr. Black, impact?
Yeah, we have not done oversight work on NEPA applications at all lately, so I can't.
Can you define lately for me? Last 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years?
That I'm aware of yeah. Let me be clear. So I don't represent the OIG as a whole. I came here prepared to talk about the oversight work that the DOE OIG does with regard to Inflation Reduction Act and IIJA Act. I can say that in my purview, in my portfolio of work, we have no ongoing work on NEPA applications and siting.
Mr. Ruska?
We don't have ongoing work in that. We have recognized for years and years that permitting is a huge challenge, and so being able to do NEPA analysis in a timely fashion is important.
Let me come back to you, Mr. Black, and see, do you agree that the efficient review, if this was in your purview, do you agree the efficient review of Class 6 permits is critical for getting carbon management projects like those funded by DO off the ground, with the goal in mind that taxpayer dollars aren't being wasted?
That would certainly seem to be a reasonable statement, absolutely.
And could we add that to the end of that statement, the fact that we want those businesses to be successful, get up and running off the ground, as it were, and to be able to actually capture more carbon carbon and store it underground? Would that be a good goal?
I personally would find no fault with that statement.
I don't understand why that hasn't been a priority, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, my friend Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes for his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me congratulate the Palmer Clark team for their assignment to lead the subcommittee. Look forward to working with you. We have never seen a president encourage lawlessness or inflict pointless suffering on Americans at the scale we are seeing today. Nor have committee Republicans failed more egregiously at holding the president accountable than they are doing right now. That failure threatens Americans' access to safe drinking water and even our national security. Every American deserves safe drinking water. That is why Democrats made historic investments in our water systems. Right now, that money is being used to bolster drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure across our great country. In my district, this funding is helping to replace thousands of lead pipes that pose a tremendous risk to people's drinking water. I've always enjoyed that working relationship with the Fed EPA and the state DEC. Even as some funds begin to flow again, Donald Trump's chaotic funding freeze and mixed messages from EPA have created pointless uncertainty for states and for families. Last year, GAO published a report on its priority recommendations to EPA that had not yet been addressed. Many of these recommendations focused on EPA's efforts to make certain that Americans have access to safe drinking water. Since Donald Trump took office, there have been dozens of reports about mass terminations of federal employees on short notice, including the staff at EPA. So based on GAO's past work, would drastic workforce reductions impact EPA's ability to manage drinking water and wastewater system? Anybody?
I'm going to start this answer, and perhaps I'll turn it over to the IG from EPA. So yes, as you said, Congressman Tonko, a big infusion of funds to the state revolving funds. There's been a demonstrated need across the country for funds for utilities to make sure that they're upgrading their systems and their systems are in working order. So those monies go to the states that EPA provides, and the states themselves revolve the monies down to the water utilities to make sure that those are working well. So yes, our work has found that it's important for those state revolving funds to be working, and that the folks that work to provide that are there. But it's really then the states and the local utilities that are doing the work, right, for all of us to ensure that we have clean drinking water.
But getting those dollars out in an effective and efficient way
is important.
With the states is important.
Yes.
And lesser people means a longer time in getting that work done. as the situation continues to exist, where a number of communities require that assistance from EPA. Ms. Murphy, were you going to say something?
Yes, that's correct. And it is the Office of Inspector General, it's our responsibility to make sure the taxpayer dollars are being used as Congress intended, that they're going to the people that, that need the money and the money is getting out.
Well, could abruptly firing hundreds of EPA staff, as we have seen in past weeks, made it more difficult for EPA to conduct the data verification audits that GAO recommends?
That's a question.
I mean, yes, I do agree with that statement, right? If these are the people that are supposed to do the job, and if they're not there, that job isn't being done.
These are answers that I tried to get by going to EPA, but not a welcome wagon there. It's not just EPA or our drinking water infrastructure that is at risk with these pointless firings. 2 weeks ago, Elon Musk, empowered as he is, fired more than 300 people from the National Nuclear Security Administration. The NNSA is responsible for safeguarding our nuclear weapons stockpile, but Elon Musk still thought it made sense to fire 16% of its staff overnight. We don't know what the calculus was, what the awareness was. We've got inspectors general that can advise, but I guess they're being let go too. So even though administration officials quietly scaled back the purge, NNSA's importance to our national security is not something we can afford for someone to learn about through trial and error. This whole episode is even more concerning because NNSA has long been included on GAO's high-risk list, and GAO reports have identified workforce recruitment and retention as a significant challenge that the agency faces. So, Mr. Rusko, can NNSA effectively address any of the challenges GAO has identified by sowing chaos and confusion in its workforce?
The gentleman's time is almost expired. Mr. Rusko, you may answer the question.
I can't speak directly to NNSA, but it is important to have to strategically look at your workforce, and if you're going to fire people or hire people, hire and fire the right people.
That sounds what efficiency is all about, so I hope we do finally get to efficiency as a model here. Thank you, and with that I yield.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, for 5 minutes for his questions.
Thank you, Chair Palmer, for holding this important oversight hearing today, and I appreciate the witnesses for testifying. This body has a duty to conduct oversight. All the money sent out through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and so-called Inflation Reduction Act is imperative that we do our due diligence to see just where that money went. It's also important to understand, what people, their job roles, what they're doing, and actually what they're producing, which seems to get lost in all this. These laws added to our out-of-control government spending, and as we have seen in prior hearings, some of this funding went to special interest groups. With billions of dollars being given out rapidly, it is critical that we see where American taxpayer dollars are going and that they are properly vetted. There are a lot of questions surrounding EPA's $27 billion Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund program, particularly its decision to use a financial intermediary to hold program funding, how that differs from other award mechanisms, how EPA will monitor these funds, and whether Americans will be able to see what these organizations receiving billions of dollars are using their money for. Mr. Gomez, to your knowledge, has the Government Accountability Office ever seen a structure where a financial intermediary has been used for grant making within EPA or any federal agency?
So within EPA, we're not aware of that. The federal government has used these financial agents for a variety of different activities. In fact, GAO did a report on it a number of years ago. But I believe for EPA, and I know that the IG is here, she can confirm, I believe that that's a new funding model at EPA.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes. Ms. Murley, when the EPA Office of Inspector General became aware of EPA's plan to use a financial intermediary to hold program funds, what concerns did your office raise and what rationale did EPA provide?
It was at a meeting that we had where we were introduced to the program, and we asked questions about the due diligence process that would be put into place, the vetting, and because it was new to the EPA, it was new to us as an oversight agency, so we had questions about the whole process. We still have we're still looking into that and the questions that we had.
So it's not been conclusive as to, whether this is the right way to do things here?
It was, for us, how do we conduct oversight of
Yeah,
such a new program?
exactly.
And something that we were not familiar with.
Okay. Did they give you a reason why they're doing this?
I don't have that.
It wouldn't be that they have something to hide or anything like that, or they don't want you to know what's going on or anything like that? Okay. The committee has been examining the risk associated with EPA's environmental justice grant programs on October 16, 2024. Your office announced that it was conducting an audit of EPA's fiscal year 2021 Environmental Justice Collaborative Program Solving Cooperative Agreement Program, in which 34 recipients were awarded funding. Under the 23 program, however, EPA selected 98 recipients to receive funding. That's almost 3 times the number of awards made in 2021. Mr. Murley, are you concerned about EPA's ability to monitor so many different recipients and awards?
I'm not familiar with the additional program, but we always are concerned that there's risks when you have, there's been systematic challenges that I raised with data, but also with grants management on both the getting out the grants and then the proper monitoring of grant recipients. So that's continued. That's a theme for us in our oversight work of the EPA.
Yeah, and just like each one of you, if you've seen, these dollars go out rapidly to these grant programs. I mean, what are your concerns? And I'll start, Mr. Murley, with you. I've got about 44 seconds. I mean, this is unprecedented as far as we know, particularly with the end of one administration, the beginning of another administration. Obviously, with $36 trillion in debt. And of course, my friends on the other side are questioning, what are y'all doing? Well, we're trying to solve this issue. So, what concerns do you have about what you've seen?
Our concerns when you have such a large volume of money getting out the door with such tight statutory deadlines are what processes and internal controls were in place for that money going out. Were the processes followed? What structures were in place? And so that's always what we would call a situation of risk, right? Yeah. Where there's risk involved when those factors are in play.
All right, I'm out of time, but if y'all all would respond. I mean, I'd like to know if y'all follow where the money actually goes. In other words, how the money goes and where it ends up.
The gentleman's time has expired.
I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Trahan, for 5 minutes for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses here today. At a Commerce, Manufacturing, and Trade Subcommittee hearing earlier this month, I spoke about how important it is for the government to be a stable and reliable partner in our public-private partnerships. Businesses that partner with the federal government need to be able to trust that the government will follow through on their side of the deal. But the Trump administration is not delivering stability or reliability for the American people. They're only providing confusion and chaos. One day, federal workers are fired. The next day, the Trump administration is desperately trying to rehire some subset of the people that they just fired. One day, my district has the funds to address stormwater overflows. The next day, those funds are suspended. And it's not just Democratic districts that are hurt by unilateral funding freezes. People in districts that my Republican colleagues represent are also being harmed. Unfortunately, we just aren't hearing Republicans reflect the concern and outrage voiced by their constituents. For example, there's a bipartisan infrastructure law funded cleanup of the toxic Peachtree Orchard Road groundwater plume in Augusta, Georgia. The government made a commitment to help fund this cleanup and improve the lives of the people living in that community. But arbitrarily freezing the bipartisan infrastructure law and IRA funding makes it harder for Americans to actually trust that the government will follow through on its commitments and not abandon these important projects. When Americans can trust the government to keep its word, we can create powerful public-private partnerships and good-paying jobs. In my district, a factory that's being built with bipartisan infrastructure law funding that will produce low-cost green hydrogen, a project that improves our energy security, helps address rising energy costs, and creates family-sustaining jobs. If Republicans truly believed in an all-of-the-above approach to America's energy future, then this is exactly the kind of project that they should support. investments in clean energy production can help cut costs for consumers um, and keep America competitive and resilient. I think it's important to recognize just how much time and effort it takes to build new factories and bring them online. Mr. Rusko, how important it is for the government to be a consistent and reliable partner in attracting private investment?
Well, it is important. It is important from the perspective of the private sector when they enter a contract that the terms of that contract remain the same throughout the process.
And when private partners are worried that the government might be inconsistent or unreliable, what effect does that have on projects and taxpayer investments?
Well, once an award has been made for a public-private partnership, for example, if there are delays that can threaten the project
and cause rising costs. Last year, the GAO published a report on the Department of Energy's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. This office does the important work of partnering with the private sector to deliver clean energy projects at scale. We're talking about major projects like clean hydrogen and advanced nuclear reactors, including in rural communities where the energy and the infrastructure it's delivered through just costs more. Mr. Rusko, in that report, GAO made 2 recommendations to improve OSED's approach to workforce planning and program management. Both recommendations remain open. Do you think that the massive layoffs we've seen at DOE will improve the agency's ability to address either of those recommendations?
OSED spent over a year trying to build the workforce in order to make the awards that it did. And now that a lot of that money is out the door, it is time to, invest in the monitoring staff. They were already on that path, and I do know that in some cases, some of the recent events that had cost a contract that was designed explicitly to monitor awards that had gone out the door.
Thank you. If the federal government is unwilling to invest in America's future, if there is a fear that a so-called pause will continue indefinitely or recur, why would businesses ever take the risk to invest alongside the government? For decades, the federal government has been a reliable partner, but this administration is proving that it cannot be counted on. If the government cannot be trusted to keep its word, it will lead to missed opportunities, a slowing economy with fewer jobs, and wasted tax dollars. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Fulcher, for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the hearing today. This is going to go to Mr. Gomez and Mr. Rusko, and it has to do with reporting. And if I understand correctly, at least from the written testimony, inspector generals from both DOE and the EPA are citing lack of data as being problematic, lack of data from potential recipients, subrecipients under IIJA. And it looks like that has led to complications when it comes to the funding component. And first of all, I want you to tell me, am I reading this right? And if so, some of the reporting is pretty complex for some of these small municipalities and so on, especially in the arena of water and whatnot, water purity. Am I reading that right? And if so, talk to me about the reporting and what can be done potentially to improve that, or maybe identify the specific data that's needed.
Sure, and thank you for that question. So generally what we found is that, like, for small utilities across the country, rural utilities, they usually lack the technical expertise, the financial support, and so they're usually looking for ways to simplify, right? Sometimes we have duplicative reporting, which we've said needs to be done away with, and they're trying to improve that, right? So that, yeah, they have to do engineering reports, for example, but there's usually there's duplicative reporting or applications to apply for different water programs, for example. So that is an area that we see where communities across the country could benefit if there is not duplicative reporting or if they have the technical support to help them.
Mr. Rusko, your comments, and if that's in line with your thoughts, what do we do?
Sorry, is that on?
Yeah.
I would defer to Alfredo on that specific thing. Obviously, for monitoring, you need quality information from recipients, and you also need the appropriate staff to evaluate that in a timely fashion.
So to that end, we did follow up, my staff helped, we follow up with some of our municipalities, and the feedback we get is it's not the monitoring or the reporting, as long as they can get the data, the specifics. It's not the monitoring that they're unwilling to do or inconsistent with their objectives, because they have to worry about lawsuits and all of that type of thing too. But it's who they're interacting with sometimes, and where that data is going, and who's responding to them. And DEQ, for example, Department of Environmental Quality in our state, is a much preferred channel to interact with for especially the smaller municipalities. Once again, I'd like to get input from Mr. Gomez, Mr. Rusko. How can we improve that relationship so that perhaps the local is more involved as opposed to EPA?
Sure. So again, in the water sector, usually it's those EPA regional offices, right? Like, for example, Idaho, I believe, belongs to Region 10. Is that right?
I believe so, yeah.
In Washington. So it's those regional EPA staff that are working with the state of Idaho, that department, for example, but also reach out to the small utilities and those towns. There's also a group called circuit writers that actually help these small communities get the data that they need, put together engineering reports. So it's just making sure those communication channels perhaps are open between the regional people at EPA, the state people, and then coming down to the local staff. I mean, we go out and talk to these water districts ourselves to learn from them and to find out what is it that they're struggling with, what do they need help in.
Okay, Mr. Rusko, I'd like your take with this one added comment. In my state, as is not uncommon in the West, the scope is so much bigger because the federal footprint is so large, 2/3 of our landmass, for example. Your thoughts, and we've only got about 20 seconds left. I apologize.
Well, my expertise is on the energy side. For energy awards, federal energy awards, typically the recipients are private sector companies. They don't have trouble coming up with the information as long as the contract's clear, sort of what information is required. It's not so much funds going out to communities as it is in the water situation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rusko. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. McClellan, for 5 minutes for her question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for holding this very important hearing. I want to thank the witnesses for being here this morning. Your work, as we have discussed, is very critical to making sure we ensure the transparency and integrity of our government, and so thank you for your work. And some of my questions may have already been touched on, but these are very important issues of concern, and I want to make sure that I have a chance to put on the record, because my constituents have raised a lot of concerns about what's been happening over the past month, or I had a town hall meeting with double the number of folks participating as usual. And I was deeply concerned when the president fired inspector generals from across 17 agencies, including the EPA. As we've discussed today, the job of an inspector general is to be an independent, nonpartisan watchdog, and it is a vital role in investigating ethics violations, exposing corruption, and protecting taxpayer dollars. And the decision to remove the EPA inspector general is particularly troubling, since EPA regulators settled multiple lawsuits with Tesla over violations of the Clear Air Act and hazardous waste laws. And so, Ms. Murley and Mr. Black, I wonder if you could further elaborate on the role your offices play in ensuring that government programs are free from corruption and conflicts of interest.
Our office has a staff of dedicated oversight professionals that are committed to the mandate that Congress gave us, which is to prevent and detect waste, fraud, and abuse, and to promote economies and efficiencies at the EPA programs. And that is what we are very cognizant that that's our mission, and that's what we show up to work to do every day. Thank you.
I thank you for that. Mr. Black, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, certainly. The role of the OIG is to identify gaps and opportunities for improvement and changes to the internal control structure of the department, its programs, and its operations, and to, by doing so, to improve and prevent fraud, waste, and abuse. And if I may, I know there's a lot of buzz in the media and in the Congress about, you know, what risks there is to having had the Inspector Generals removed. I want to add some assurance that the Department of Energy's Office of Inspector General has a deep and well-trained and experienced staff of professionals who will continue to do the appropriate oversight to make sure that the risk for fraud, waste, and abuse is continued to be covered, continue to be addressed, and I can offer some assurance that we are continuing to do our duties as written in the IG Act, and with or without a head, we've still got a deep and experienced cadre of leaders who are going to make sure that this mission continues to be addressed.
And I'm glad to hear that, and that's true of so many of our federal agencies and so many of our civilian federal workforce, our military federal workforce, who are dedicated to upholding their oath of office and helping us uphold ours to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And yet, including over 300,000 federal employees in Virginia, where I represent, and yet ever since President Trump and Elon Musk started taking a chainsaw to our federal agencies, again, constituents have flooded my office with thousands of calls about the consequences of these reckless actions, including the wholesale firing of the federal workforce, even in cases where the people firing them had no clue what they did, like protect our nuclear stockpile. And these are professionals who have served faithfully under both Democratic and Republican administrations, just like those in your department. But now an unelected billionaire and his Doge bros who have no idea what many of these agencies or what many of these employees, including probably you, do, are making decisions and forcing employees to justify their very existence, firing probationary employees. That doesn't just gut our federal workforce, it helps to destroy our entire talent pipeline. And as you just said, you have a cadre of professionals, probably some of them are probationary or once were probationary, and having them summarily fired makes it very difficult to keep that talent pipeline going. And so, Ms. Murley and Mr. Black, have your offices found any evidence that the mass firing of civil servants at any agency like EPA or the DOE have actually benefited our country in the past month? And we may not have time for you to answer here, so I'll ask you to submit your answer on the record afterwards, please. And I yield
We'll be happy to do so.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. DeGette, for 5 minutes for her question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize that we haven't been able to be here for the entire hearing. Mr. Carter and I, he's the chair, and I'm the ranking member of the Health Subcommittee. We're in the middle of a hearing downstairs, but we've been following what's been happening, and we appreciate all of you coming today. I particularly want to thank Mr. Black and Ms. Murley for coming today from the offices of Inspectors General at DOE and the EPA, because it's your offices that hold our agencies accountable to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. I think it's a shame that former EPA Inspector General O'Donnell and former DOE Inspector General Donaldson can't add to this conversation, since they were unceremoniously fired by President Trump. And I'm glad, Mr. Black, to hear you say that the law is still going to be enforced by the people who are left. I want to talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, though, however, because I want to talk about that. Now, Mr. Black, did any point in the last Congress, when we had 20 oversight and investigations hearings, Did any point did the former DOE Inspector General present to this committee guidance of waste, fraud, or abuse as it relates to the grants?
We have been performing a great deal of oversight work on grant activities funded by the IIJA and the IRA. And
Yes.
We've certainly identified some internal control gaps that warrant some improvement. And we do in fact have some investigations that.
So let me ask,
for fraud, waste.
let me ask the question again.
Okay.
Did the Inspector General present any evidence of waste, fraud, or abuse in these grants to this committee last Congress, yes or no?
I do not believe that the written statements included specific instances.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Murley, did the former EPA Inspector General present any evidence of waste, fraud, or abuse to this committee as it relates to this, these grants?
I would have to submit for the record his past testimonies. I don't have them.
Are you aware of any?
I have in the reports that I cite in our in my testimony that there are instances of that we've found waste or funds that can be put to better use in some of the reports that we've done.
Okay. Do you know that, and you don't know whether that was presented to this committee? Is that
I
what you're
don't, but I
saying?
can.
Okay. I would
follow up with
appreciate you if you supplement your answer. Now, over $262 million in funding from this Clean School Bus Program, airport infrastructure grants, energy efficiency upgrades, and other grants have been frozen in Denver, which is my district. The projects in jeopardy were announced and put in motion between 2022 and the first half of 2024, well before the election, and despite the claim that the Biden administration, quote, was throwing gold bars off the Titanic. So I want to talk for a minute about this in the context of waste, fraud, and abuse. 1 month into the Trump administration, all of these grants were frozen. I would call that abuse, because all the grants have been frozen and taxpayer money is just not being used. So Ms. Murley, I want to ask you a question. Could defying legal court orders to release the funds already obligated and allocated constitute an abuse of power?
I think that's a question better directed to the agency, and I can speak to.
So if they already gave the funds, and then then the funds were blocked, and then a court said release them and they didn't, wouldn't that be an abuse of power?
I think that's a question for the agency.
Okay, I guess I can understand why you wouldn't want to answer it. Now, since EPA Zeldin was confirmed, over 1,000 EPA employees have also been fired or placed on leave. Ms. Murley, isn't this reduction in workforce antithetical to your office's own 2022 report recommending that EPA should enhance its grants oversight workforce?
Our reports have recommended that EPA enhance its grants workforce, as has our top management challenges identified that as a problem for the agency.
Great, thanks. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for his 5 minutes for his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to wave on, and I thank all of our witnesses for joining us today as we look to examine the Biden administration's energy and environment spending, a series of decisions that drastically increase waste, fraud, and abuse in our already bloated bureaucracy. In my own state, the state of Georgia, excuse me, the Biden EPA handed out $2 billion, that's B, billion dollars, to the Stacey Abrams-backed group Power Forward Communities in April of 2024. Power Forward Communities received this money even though it was founded only a couple of months earlier in late 2023, and it never managed anywhere near the grant's dollar figure. It reported, in fact, listen to this now, just $100 in total revenue during its first 3 months in operation. Went from $100 to $2 billion. If that's not waste, fraud, and abuse, I don't know what is. But nevertheless, Ms. Murley, let me ask you, If a concern about conflict of interest or ethics was brought before the EPA Office of Inspector General, how would your office handle that?
It would depend on the circumstances involving the complaint that was brought to our office, but we would look at, if we were talking about the conflict of interest involved with EPA employees, we would look at the ethics agreements involved, the financial disclosures of those individuals, and then if we're talking about the
So you do look at the financial disclosures?
Yes, in the situation.
Of the group or the individuals? Or
Well,
both?
in that situation, I was talking about the individuals, but then
Okay.
we would do, there's two different scenarios. There's the EPA employees who are working on a program, and then the conflicts of the recipients of the federal funds.
Okay, would it stroke your interest if you saw where a group had only had $100 in revenue for the first 3 months and then all of a sudden was being given a grant of $2 billion?
That would be something that we would be interested in.
Sure.
Looking at.
Okay. Have you heard of this grant that was given to Power Forward communities and before? Have you heard about this? I'm sure you have.
I've not specifically that one, but no, I don't recall.
You don't recall?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's been a lot.
There has been a lot. But in the state of Georgia, this is of, as you can imagine, of interest to us. So can I just ask you, would you commit here that you will ensure that these funds were properly allocated? In other words, will you please look at what happened with Power Forward?
Yep. Yes, we are initiating work in the IRA space at this point in time to look at the EPA's.
You are a little hesitant. I mean, is that a yes?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let me ask you this: how can EPA be sure that programs are spending money wisely and not giving their friends at these organizations free rein over American tax dollars? I assume this is what we're speaking to earlier when you say you're looking at the disclosures of the EPA officials as well as the group itself.
You look at all of it. When we conduct audits or evaluations, we look at how the program was set up, the internal controls in place, what checks that they have.
Did you look at this? Do you know? Before this money went out, did y'all look at it?
I don't know off the top. I would have to get that for the record.
Can you get that for me
Yes.
for the record?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what was looked at and what concerns were expressed, if any?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Black, let me ask you this. In your opening statement, you mentioned the fast nature in which funds moved at the Department of Energy and $46 billion in loans completed between December of 2024 and January of 2025. That's got to be a record. Wow.
Yes, that is incredibly fast. For example, 15 years ago during the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the Department of Energy Loan Program Office issued about $40 million, don't quote me on the number, approximately, over 5 years. So
over 5 years.
Issuing 40,
and yet in 1 month we had $46 billion. Did that raise any?
Oh yeah, that is of concern to us, and we are definitely looking into the facts and circumstances surrounding the pace with which those loans have been signed.
Mr. Chairman, I really do appreciate this hearing. Thank you for holding this. Come on. We need help here. Ms. Murley, we really do need help. I look forward to your answers to my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your opportunity to wave on, and I yield back.
Thanks, the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Dingle, for 5 minutes for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I love my colleague from Georgia. He and I are working on many things together. I hope you have that same standard of ethics and a whole lot of other things that are going on right now, too, that we need to be looking at conflicts of interest. And I happen to be someone who thinks that this is a very important program and that we need to be spending the money wisely and importantly. Not one penny should be misappropriated in any way, and I'll join my colleague. I think that should be a standard across the government. We have a moral obligation to invest in clean energy. Clean energy investments do not just help us meet our energy needs while protecting the environment, they also represent a great economic opportunity. Unfortunately, Republicans seem too busy attacking clean energy investments to notice the jobs that those investments are creating for American workers, and even more importantly, how they're lowering the costs for working families. Even, our new EPA administrator has also attacked the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and I want to make sure people are getting the right facts, that they're not getting misinformation. So I want to set the record straight again. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund was established by the Inflation Reduction Act and based on original bipartisan legislation with Republicans and Democrats. I admit I was one of them, but it was a bipartisan group. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund was on track to invest $27 billion to make clean energy financing more accessible for working class communities, the same communities that have borne the brunt of environmental pollution, robbing them of their health and economic opportunities. I've long been a vocal supporter of creating a clean energy accelerator because of its potential to make and manage investments in ambitious clean energy that benefits working families. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund represents the culmination of these efforts, empowering us to attack the climate crisis head-on. The fund is even designed to leverage private capital by uniting the public and private sector around the shared goals of decarbonizing our country and creating jobs for American workers, all while lowering energy costs for families. EPA was laser focused on making sure every dollar is reached, that products would not have otherwise been built. But now it seems as if they're only focused on making it impossible for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to succeed. It doesn't have to be this way. I know Republicans spent the last 2 years investigating EPA's implementation of the IRA, including the agency's rigorous process of selecting, vetting, and issuing final awards to the Greenhouse Gas Fund's recipients. If you had found anything, I am certain that you would have shared it with us instead of waiting for President Biden to leave office. So I'm just questioning how we seem to have found money that was never missing, especially given intense scrutiny that began as soon as the IRA was signed into law, not when President Trump became president. I know everybody wants the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund to fail on the Republican side, and that makes me sad. It would be terrible for American workers and working families. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund's Solar for All program was on track to support residential solar deployment efforts in every state that can save families 20% or more on their energy bills. Meanwhile, the National Clean Investment Fund and Clean Communities Investment Accelerator were designed to work together to leverage private investments supporting clean energy projects while ensuring the benefit of those investments go directly to communities where investments are made. Instead of working to make sure that the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund succeeds, you all just want to keep betting against it. And looks like this administration's doing the same thing. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, by design, is intended to reach red and blue states and their districts. We cannot let the promised benefits of the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund slip away because some would rather play some political games than support investments in all communities and get us energy security and reduce consumers working, those hard-working people who say they want to pay less in their bills. So let's stop trying to make sure that it's going to fail. I'm almost out of time, so I didn't get to ask you all any questions. But I think this Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund makes a difference. It lowers costs, and I would ask my colleagues here, I think it's simply too important to let it fail.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
And I yield back.
John, the chair now recognizes gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Castor, for 5 minutes for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Just a couple of days into this new administration, the president illegally fired 19 inspectors general. including the IG from the EPA and the Department of Energy. These are vital public servants. They're the cops on the beat that help us root out waste, fraud, and abuse and make nonpartisan recommendations to Congress to act upon. I'd like to know, Ms. Murley, has the illegal firing of the EPA IG delayed your oversight responsibilities in your office?
It has not.
Has it complicated it? Has it taken time and energy away from tasks at hand?
Any change in any organization brings a period of time where things have to settle
Yes. Go ahead.
But I will say, and I'll echo my colleague's point, we have a dedicated staff of professional oversight professionals who are committed to the mission of the OIG.
I appreciate them. How many people have been fired or left out of EPA IG's office?
We have not had any firings or people leave. We did have about 32, I believe, individuals. I need to get that exact number. Who were in the process of being hired that are caught up in the hiring freeze, and we had about 23 individuals take the deferred resignation program.
Okay, and for Mr. Black, same questions. Has the firing of the Inspector General taken time away? As Ms. Murley said, sometimes it takes time to settle when there are changes.
Yeah, so I work in the front office, and I worked directly with and for the Inspector General as her chief advisor, and there was certainly some disruption when Terry Donaldson was removed. However, like I said in a previous line of questioning, there's a cadre of professionals of 300+ IG accountants, auditors, inspectors, lawyers that continue to serve the taxpayer by preventing fraud, waste, and abuse, and we will continue to do so.
And then what's been the change in personnel from the beginning of the year to today?
We have, the organization had 39 people accept the deferred resignation program, including myself. So my last day is going to be close of business Friday this week, and that's the only number that I have come here prepared with.
How long have you worked at the IG's office?
33 years.
33 years, okay. You know, the other illegal activity has been, at the outset of this administration, the shutdown and or freeze on funding. Has the EPA IG's office, are you keeping track of, you know, especially now that federal courts have ruled that those freezes on grants and loans are illegal? Are you keeping track of how much money now is being illegally withheld that should be, you know, part of the course of doing business?
I don't know if that's a number we're tracking.
Okay. And do you have any information on that account?
I do not, and I think those questions would be better directed at the agency.
Okay. Mr. Black?
So 2 days ago, I met with the top leadership of the department's loan programs office, and they clarified that although new loan closures are paused, the disbursements for those loans that have been closed, that are active, disbursements are being made after leadership reviews individual transactions, and disbursements are being made.
What grants and loans are being frozen right now?
That's a question best asked to the department, but I'm aware, and there's I mean, literally hundreds of grant programs and 5 loan programs, but so that's a complex question with a lot of moving parts. But I'm informed by department leadership that there is a process in place to make disbursements for programs on a case-by-case basis as situations.
But I think the federal courts have ruled that they don't have the authority to make, they don't, that that's an illegal action to withhold the grants and loans that are congressionally directed. So you're saying that the agency has told you they're still freezing, they're still holding back funds.
That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm informed by department leadership that that disbursements are being made after leadership review.
Thank you. I yield back.
thank the gentlelady. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes for my questions. And I want to point out that we're holding this hearing to address concerns about hundreds of billions of dollars in fraud and improper payments that are now about $240 billion per year. That is why a freeze would be appropriate to do the needed investigations to attempt to stop the abuse of American taxpayers. First of all, Mr. Black, thank you for your service. The ranking member claimed that my majority colleagues and I wasted time conducting oversight to these programs concerning that we're sending out $240 billion in improper payments. Would you all agree that oversight of hundreds of billions of dollars in federal funding under these programs is a waste of time? Just a yes or no. Ms. Murley? Is this a waste of time? How about you, Mr. Gomez?
No.
How about you, Mr. Black?
Absolutely not. The more oversight, the better.
How about you, Mr. Roscoe?
No.
Rusco, I should say, not Roscoe. That, also, Mr. Guthrie, Chairman Guthrie and Mr. Carter both raised this question about these grants that went to relatively small entities. In particular, the one Mr. Carter mentioned had $100 in revenue and then suddenly got $2 billion. Doesn't that raise some serious questions about capacity of, I mean, aside from any allegations or suspicions or considerations about the possibility of fraud or misuse of the funds, wouldn't that be a major capacity issue, Mr. Black?
Capacity is a concern, and the capacity to appropriately manage the vast funds from the IIJA and the IRA has been identified as a risk by the OIG in the past, and it remains one of our concerns.
Shouldn't we be looking at where the money went? Because if you go from $100 to $2 billion, that should raise some serious questions about the capacity of the organization to handle that amount of money, and maybe raise some questions about pass-throughs, these entities being set up as pass-through vehicles, which I think we will look into at a later date. Ms. Murley, my colleagues also expressed concern about staffing at the EPA Office of Inspector General, but they were not as concerned when they decided not to provide any funding for its oversight work in the IRA. Did that pose any challenges for your organization when you had this massive amount of money flowing in?
It does pose challenges because of resource constraints with our staffing. You know, we did receive funding for IIJ oversight, and I think the work that we've done there demonstrates the good work that we can do and our ability to provide results when we're given the funds to do sufficient oversight. With the IRA, we are constrained to our core budget, and about 40% of our audit work is mandatory, so that's what's done by what we have to do by statute. So we are constrained in the ability to do a more robust oversight of the IRA. That said, we are looking at our core resources and doing the best we can in that area.
Okay. Mr. Black, in December, your office reported that the DOE LPO is administrating more than $385 billion in new loan authority without ensuring a regulatory and contractually compliant and effective system to manage the organizational conflicts of interest. In the interim findings report, the IG stated that the Loan Program Office seems to be asserting that as long as it does not compile, track, update, or reconcile relationships, it maintains a 100% compliance rate across the Loan Programs Office, also referring to it as trust but don't verify. Can you explain the concerns stemming from this lack of systemic management of organizational conflicts of interest?
Certainly. So the finding that we have identified and issued in that report concerned the lack of appropriate controls to document and do the cross-checking and make sure that the all known parties on both sides of the transaction are properly identified and disclosures are made with regard to who's representing who has relations to who, and stuff like that. The department responded, the prior administration responded by disagreeing with the severity, the impact, the magnitude of the lack of these conflict of interest controls, and they, as part of their defense, noted that there have been no published findings of serious conflicts of interest. And our response was that the notion that you hadn't identified these things was primarily because you didn't have the mechanisms in place, the controls in place, to have those comparisons and identifications of related parties identified.
You said something in your testimony that I took note of, and there was something also said by the Inspector General that I took note of, that the Inspector General referred to it as they treat it like monopoly money. But you said something in your testimony about a tolerance for risk. And I think that's why we're holding this hearing, why we're going to continue to dig into this. And I fully anticipate that we'll be inviting people back in to meet with us again. With that, I will yield back, and I would like to thank all the witnesses for being here today. Members may have additional written questions for all of you. I'll remind members that they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record, and I ask that the witnesses do their best to submit responses within 10 business days upon receipt of the questions. And Mr. Black, since Friday's your last day, you should have time to answer them if anyone submits them. So I ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the documents included on the staff hearing documents list. And without objection, that will be the order. Without objection, the subcommittee is adjourned.